I think right now, when the free press is at such a inflection point, when you see the White House now picking which pool reporters are going to have access to the Oval Office and have the best access to the president, we really are in danger of losing a independent press that is a check on power, that is there to hold power accountable. And we're going to need as much support from readers, viewers, listeners as possible in order to sustain that. How do we preserve a vibrant free press given the fault lines, given the decline? And of course, even before this, we had a fragmentation of the audience. Newspapers in many places declined or even disappeared. We were talking just before we went live about the decline of local papers, that we now have a terrible phenomenon that in many state capitals, there's not a newspaper. So how do we fill that gap? How do we continue to hold power accountable? And I think we are in a period of transition, and we're finding ways in which that's possible. One possibility is nonprofit journalism. That's what NPR has done so brilliantly for years, or PBS. And now we have ProPublica, which is one of the most fabulous news organizations, breaks story after story, does unflinching journalism, and has now created partnerships with local outlets so that they can help support local journalists. So that's part of the answer. And I think the new phenomenon of these independent journalists is part of the answer as well.
I think one of the challenges, Jennifer, is how to do the sort of comprehensive thing that a newspaper, the role that it served, the sort of one stop, and you feel like you go through the day's paper. For those of us that loved the texture, the hard copy of a paper, and you would feel like when you were done with it that you really had a sense of what was happening in your community and the world, from sports to news to entertainment. Now everything is so fragmented. So you're
Yes.
mentioning ProPublica, so people go there for investigative journalism, or they're going to the Hill, or they're going to different specialized kinds of things, or they'll go to the Contrarian. But there isn't really a model, I think. Even nonprofit, I'm not sure there's a model for that kind of all-in-one. What do you think?
You're right that it's kind of become a smorgasbord. And that takes, first of all, much more effort by the reader. And many people barely have time for one paper when they're really compelled to go find, as you said, three, four, five sources to find that complete package. Then that's when they resort to things like social media, which has a mishmash of credible outlets and non-credible rumor and all sorts of sites. But I think that is kind of the direction that we're going, that it is going to be hard, with the exception of two or three very large newspaper entities, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today. And those are really the three most viable national newspapers at this point. And I think aside from that, people are going to have to do a little bit more investigative work. We try at the Contrarian, and this is one of the wonderful things about Substack, to kind of create a network of other sites, of other sources that people can go to. We give recommendations. So if you like us, that's great, but also check out these other sources as well. People always ask, what's on your media diet? It's very interesting. You're right. It used to be much shorter. I could make it shorter. I could list, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, all done. That serves the purpose. And now it has to be much longer. And sometimes, as is the case, if you want to be a paid subscriber, which I highly recommend for the Contrarian, there is a cost factor that eventually builds up because you're paying multiple outlets. But I think we have to get away from the notion, frankly, that news is free. And that's one of the things that I think diminished the revenue stream for outlets, and which still serves as a barrier, for example, to start up a local news outlet. People got this idea that they could get their news for free, and it costs something. And I
Or
think people have to be willing to make an investment. It's an investment in democracy as well as an investment in just becoming an informed citizen.
or not even free necessarily, Jennifer, but so highly subsidized by ads. Your LA Times subscription for our Southern California viewers was so heavily what you paid
Yes,
compared to the cost of producing that newspaper was a fraction because there were so many department store and car and all these other real estate ads that no longer exist that were making what you paid the LA Times kind of a minimum, working class people could afford to subscribe to a couple of papers if they wanted to. And those
exactly. And
those days are long gone.
and really, we didn't realize it at the time, but Craigslist was the beginning of the downfall of many newspapers because once that happened and once people could advertise digitally and once people got their ads elsewhere, that pool of revenue disappeared. And what replaced it and the ads, however annoying they may be, the little pop-up ads are simply not as valuable to the companies that advertise because, again, the audience is more fractured. It's a smaller audience. So no one outlet can really amass enough of that revenue to defray the cost for individuals. And that's why, frankly, NPR, ProPublica, Contrarian depends to such a degree on donations, on support. And we are going to find out, hopefully the answer is yes, that we provide something of value that people are willing to invest in. And I think right now, when the free press is at such a inflection point, when you see the Associated Press having to sue to get back their White House press, when you see the White House now picking which pool reporters are going to have access to the Oval Office and have the best access to the president, we really are in danger of losing a independent press that is a check on power, that is there to hold power accountable. And we're going to need as much support from readers, viewers, listeners as possible in order to sustain that.